Thank you for joining me for this Lifeway study of the book of Psalms. This is session 13. We're studying Psalm 5, verses 1 to 12. The lesson summary statement is believers can live with hope knowing that God will always do what is right and just. Before the class, I've drawn on the board a picture of a ship that's anchored in a storm. Now, I am not an artist. When I draw people, it's stick figures. So I'm sure they're going to have a lot of fun with the picture that I draw, but I can do it just well enough that they'll figure out it's a boat and it's in a stormy sea. And then I'm going to ask them when we start the class, how does this picture of a ship anchored in the midst of a storm uh, illustrate the lesson summary statement? Believers can live with hope knowing that God will always do what is right and just. I'm wanting to move them and begin to think in that direction. And so I had that picture on the board beforehand. And just some things that I might be looking for. You don't go by outward appearances. The storm will pass, but the anchor will hold. Those kinds of things. So David is in the midst of a difficult time. There are people who are attacking him. And what the psalm reveals to us is he has hope. And it's because of the character of the God that he serves. Now, I suggest that this psalm has two fundamental assertions to give believers hope in the middle of the storm. And the first is simply this: God, is not evil. That's the first 7 verses. It makes clear the passage. God is not evil. So you know that whatever evil is coming into your life is not the result of God. The second thing is, so I need God to lead me. During these times when evil has come against me, I need God to lead me. There's so many things in life that are wrong and confusing. And if I believe that this is true of God, that he is just and he's right, I can have hope about the future. One of the responsibilities of a pastor that I've unfortunately had the experience of is helping couples who have lost infants soon after they're born. That can be a confusing time, a painful time, a troublesome time. And so often it creates an additional problems with the relationship, and it creates problems in terms of their relationship with God as to why these things would happen. But this psalm is an answer to that, and it asserts these things: God is just, and God is right. He will never do evil towards us. And regardless of the events that happen in our life, and regardless of the attackers that come against us, when we have this confidence of the character of our God, it gives us hope. Now, in the Leader's Guide, uh, the first paragraph under Understand the Context, I'm going to read that to the class because I like the way it's stated in terms of giving an understanding about the background to the text. And then in the fourth paragraph, uh, I'm going to read that one and then the first sentence of the fifth paragraph, just as a way to provide context for the lesson. Now, David had a habit of making his concerns known to God, and that's what we're seeing as we turn to Psalm chapter 5. The first point is the source of righteousness, verses 1 to 6. And I want you to notice two things about this text. First of all, it begins with his request. That's verses 1 to 3. And his request is very simple: hear my prayer, O Lord. And then the second part of the passage, verses 4 through 6, are the reasons that he gives for God to hear his prayer. So I want to explain the first 3 verses. I'm not having much discussion going on in these 3 because I'm wanting to set the picture of David's request for God to hear his prayer. In verse 1, listen to my words, Lord. Consider my sighing. Pay attention to the sound of my cry, my King and my God, for I pray to you. In the morning, Lord, you hear my voice. In the morning, I plead my case to you and watch expectantly. Notice in verse 1 that you have statement that begins, and then the Lord is in the middle, and then a statement that follows. Listen to my words, Lord, and then consider my saying. And notice that's true in verse 2. Pay attention to the sound of my cry, my King and my God. And then, for I pray to you. And then you'll see it again in verse 3. In the morning, Lord, you hear my voice. In the morning, I plead my case to you and watch expectantly. The focus of David's prayer is God. Now, that may seem to be an obvious statement, but think about the times you've heard people pray and you realize they're not really praying to God, they're praying to the people that are listening. And I know that sometimes we preachers can be guilty of that too, that when we offer our prayer at the end of the sermon, that sometimes it sounds more like a wrapping up again of the sermon than actual talking to God. But the focus of David's prayer is God. That's where the emphasis is. That's where his help is going to be found. And it would be helpful, I think, for us when we pray to be certain that we're keeping our focus on God. Maybe examine our prayer life and see how many times are we really praying to ourselves or we're praying to others as opposed to God. But David's whole prayer is focused on the Lord. Now notice what he's asking the Lord when he prays. The first verse says, listen to my words. Literally, the word listen means to put into the ear. And he really wants God to listen. There's a sense of intensity about his prayer life. You can see that in the words that he uses. There's the word listen. Then verse 1, there's the word sighing. And then again, there's the word cry. That is in verse 2. And then there is the word pray. There is a real intensity about what David is praying. He really wants God to hear him, and he wants to draw close to God so that he can put this prayer in God's ear. Notice he says, consider my sighing. Now, your leader's guide will say about that word, in Hebrew, it suggests a burning sense of longing. Again, it's emphasizing the intensity with which David is offering this prayer. And it says, apparently, David's weak words could not convey completely the extreme agony in his heart. And I'm sure that there's been a time in which you just simply didn't have the words to express to God what you really wanted to say. And so David has said, listen to my words, Lord. And in fact, Lord, consider the things that are in my heart that I can't even find the words for. And pay attention to the sound of my cry. If you're a parent, could you tell the difference in the cries of your children? I mean, there's a cry that's a hurt cry. There's a cry that is a mad cry. There's a cry that is a pouty cry. There is a cry that is a fake cry. I mean, some parents, you can see them jump up because they understand the cry that is happening. And David is saying to his father, hear the sound of my cry. This is a serious cry. Now notice he says, my King and my God. He doesn't say, hear my cry, King and God. He says, my King and my God. There is this covenant relationship that he has with the Lord. And that gives him confidence as he prays. He's not just praying to a distant deity. He's praying to a God that is his God and is his King. And he says, for I pray to you. This phrase, I pray to you, is the grammar of it, one commentator says, suggests David expects an answer. He's done all of these things previously. He's come before the Lord with intensity, and he has laid this out before the Lord. He says we're in a covenant relationship, and so then he says, "I pray you." And the grammar, according to this scholar, says he's expecting God to answer him. Now, verse 3 says, in the morning, and it says it twice. So there is a sense of urgency about this, and there's also a sense of priority when he says, in the morning. In the morning, Lord, you hear my voice. Now, we've talked about this before when you're looking in the Old Testament and you talk about the word hear. it means more than just audible recognition of words, but it has about it the idea of obedience. And so he says, in the morning, Lord, hear my voice. He's asking God to act, to respond to what he's praying. And he says, in the morning, I plead my case to you and watch expectantly. The word plead is a word that means arrangement. It was used to describe them arranging the wood and the sacrifice, the animal for the sacrifice to take place. So you could imagine they don't just throw that stuff up there. They stack it in such a way that it's going to consume the sacrifice. If you are having guests over to your home, you will arrange the dinner table with the plates. You will arrange a meal in a particular way. And you do that out of honor of the guest. And so what is being said here is I have thought about my prayer. I have come to considered reasons about my prayer. I'm pleading my case to you. I want to suggest to you that maybe we ought to give more thought to our prayers. I'm all for spontaneous prayers. How could we not live without spontaneous prayers? But there ought to be times when we give some thought to what we're going to pray. If you're offered an opportunity to pray in public and you write out your prayer, is there something wrong with that? I don't think so. I think that is taking that moment very serious, and you're using it to ask God to help you have the words that express the desire of that congregation or that group. I hope you never speak ill of people who write out prayers, because this is what David's doing. I mean, he is arranging, he's giving thought. It's not just bursting out of him. And then he says, I plead my case to you. And notice this, watch expectantly. It is the picture of a watchman. And here he's saying, like a watchman is anticipating someone that's coming to the city. He said, I pray this prayer, my thought out prayer, with such intensity, based on my relationship with you. And Lord God, I'm anticipating you to respond. Now, he says, verses 1 to 3, hear my prayer. Now, verses 4 to 6, he's giving the reasons for God to hear his prayer. And so I'm going to read through the verses, but I want the class to look for two things. I may even divide the class up. One side look for this, and the other side look for the other. But there are two things I'm wanting them to see. I'm wanting them to look at these verses, and what do these verses tell us about the character of God? Because he's very clear about that. What does it tell us about the character of God? And the second thing, what is God's view of sin? So he's going to give reasons as to why God needs to hear him. So he says in verse 4, the word for, that means it's a purpose clause. From what he's just said, here's the reason for that. For you are not a God who delights in wickedness. Evil cannot dwell with you. The boastful cannot stand in your sight. You hate all evildoers. You destroy those who tell lies. The Lord abhors violent and treacherous people. That's very strong language. So I'm asking the class, what does this tell us about the character of God? And if they come back and say, well, it's right there in the lesson summary statement, he's right and he's just, there, you're good. But one thing it also says in a negative kind of way is he is not wicked. God is not wicked. You can trust the fact he'll never deal with you in a wicked way. So I want to build the character of God, the nature of God in what's being said. And then I want to turn to this view of sin, because this is a very strong statement about sin. The way that God views sin. I would suggest we take sin too lightly. I mean, when we understand the way that God perceives sin, if we had the same view of sin that God has, I'm suggesting we'd be more vigorous and more thorough in our repentance. So what is his view of sin? And your class could bring those things out. Now, let me just back up in the verse and give you some thoughts about some of the things that are said here. For you are not a God who delights in wickedness. This word delight has about it the idea of enjoyment or approval. And so you can be certain of this: God is not a God who approves or enjoys or excuses wickedness. The wickedness is talking about a condition of immorality and wickedness. And he says next, evil cannot dwell with you. And the idea of evil is it's something or someone that's not in accordance to God's will. He said, so you're not a God who delights, who finds enjoyment or finds acceptance or diminishes immorality and evil, and evil cannot dwell with you. That is, those things that are contrary to the will of God, they don't even have a moment to be in your presence. In verse 5, the boastful cannot stand in your sight. You hate all evildoers. Now, I came across a statement in Bible Hub on this word about hate. And here's some of the things that they said when it says God hates evildoers. It said the context is God favors the righteous and rejects those who practice evil. Hate encompasses the idea of intense disapproval and separation. And here it signifies God's righteous opposition to sin. His opposition is not capricious or irrational dislike. He hates all evildoers. The word evildoers there is describing a person who this is their way of life, to live in disobedience to the will of God. It says, you destroy those who tell lies. The word destroy there means they come to an end. And the Lord abhors violent and treacherous people. And those words have something about the idea of bloodshed. Now notice the sin that he's talking about, lies. And apparently there are people who are attacking David, and it is their words that they're using. They're ruining his reputation, or they're telling falsehoods about him in some fashion. Why is it that God takes lies so serious? Well, when he created us, we were the unique creation that could actually speak. And that is a reflection of God. He is a speaking God. And since we're created in the image of God, the way we use words reflects on him. And our words can either reflect honor or they can reflect dishonor. We can use words that actually, like a virus, go forth and destroys people's lives. And so it's very important. This is a very powerful word. Adam and Eve sinned because of the lies of the devil. Now, two thoughts to conclude this first point. Celebrate the kind of God he is in your prayers. Do you see how that encouraged David when he was in this discouraging moment, and he remembered, my God doesn't have anything to do with wickedness. He hates evil. He hates wickedness. He is a God who's just. He's a God who does right. And that gives me great confidence when I'm experiencing these evil words. The second thing is, God is not neutral about our behavior. Our sin is made even more obvious as we draw near to God. Now, the second point of this psalm is the benefit of righteousness, verses 7 through 10. Now, David's reflection on the sinfulness of sin and that God will not hear the ungodly causes him to plead for the mercy of God in order for him to come to God in prayer. And in contrast to the wicked, he could approach God because of God's great love, and he could ask for guidance. Now, the passage seems to me to break down in four ways. First of all, there is his practice of prayer. That's in verse 7, his practice. And then there is his actual petition of prayer in verse 8. And then third, he talks about his persecutors in verse 9. And then he talks about punishment in verse 10. So practice, verse 7, petition, verse 8, persecutors, verse 9, punishment, verse 10. Notice verse 7. But I enter your house by the abundance of your faithful love. I bow down toward your holy temple in reverential awe. You'll notice in verse 7, the first thing he does, he enters the house. Now that's obviously a reference to an earthly temple. And David being the author, the temple hadn't been built, but there was the tabernacle that represented the presence of God. So he enters the house, but notice in the second half of that verse, he bows down towards your holy temple. So this is a term of worship, a picture of worship, as he draws near to God. Now, as he draws near, what is it that allows him to come near to God? He says it's the abundance of your faithful love. That word is the word hesed, which is difficult to translate into our English language. And many times it has faithful love, steadfast love, remaining love, loyalty, just any number of things. It has about it the idea in the New Testament of the idea of grace. So the reason he can even enter the temple is because of the grace of God. And so he enters the temple, he bows down, there's worship, and then the outcome of it is reverential awe of God. That is fear. So what you have is you have a man who is able to approach the presence of God because of the grace of God, and the outcome is he has this fear of God. And we've mentioned before that the fear of God means you take God serious. And the evidence of that is obedience. So what's happening is David, he enters God's presence only because of the grace of God. And as he comes into the presence of God, because of the grace of God, the acceptance of God, the faithful love of God, the steadfast love and loyalty of God, the impact upon him is to see the greatness of this God and to have a fear of this God, a reverential awe, which results in obedience. So that tells me that the more we experience the grace of God, that's what gives us the power to want to be obedient to God. So that's something you could pray for and keep in mind. Now, verse 8, he comes to his first petition in the psalm. It says, Lord, lead me in your righteousness because of my adversaries. Make your way straight before me. Now, so my question to the class is, what is David's main request in verse 8? And it's to lead into righteousness. Now notice the explanation as to why he needs God to lead him into righteousness. Isn't this kind of surprising? The reason I need you to lead me into righteousness is because of my adversaries. So what does that mean the adversaries are doing? They're trying to lead him away from righteousness. They're trying to cause him to sin. And so he's asking, God, please lead me into righteousness because I got a whole bunch of people out here who are trying to lead me into sin. And Father, make it absolutely clear to me which is your way. See what he says? Make your way straight before me. Now I want to pause with the class, and I said, this is a good prayer for us to pray for our children, or if we have grandchildren, as well as a prayer for us. So let's just take a moment and let's just compose a prayer that we would pray for our children. So when you say, lead my child or my grandchild into righteousness, just exactly what are you thinking of? What is it that you want to see happen there? And in each case, it might be something different. I need you to lead my grandchild towards church, so that they'd be actually active in church. I need you to lead my child to have a love for the Bible, that God would capture their heart. What would you put in that passage? And then think about this. They're adversaries. What are the adversaries of youth today? And you could list a number of those things. So God, please don't let my child or my grandchild or someone else, don't let them be captured by the social media. Don't let them be captured by the values of this world or whatever those things might be. And then, Lord, lead them in the straight way. So my question is, what is it that you want God to do when it comes to that? So what I'm trying to do is give our class some help in knowing how to pray, not only for themselves, like David did, but how to pray for others. This is a wonderful petition. Lead me in your righteousness. What do you mean by that? And because of my adversaries, there's always people working against us. And make your way straight before me. And then he gives the purpose clause. Verse 9, for there is nothing reliable in what they say. Destruction is within them. Their throat is an open grave. They flatter with their tongues. In every phrase there is a part of the human body. The word say in verse 9, that's talking about the mouth. Within them, that would be talking about their heart. Then there's their throat and their tongues. What you have here is a person who is thoroughly captured by sin. And you cannot trust this person. And then verse 8, the punishment. Punish them, God. Let them fall by their own schemes. Drive them out because of their many crimes, for they rebel against you. I have a question for you. Is that a prayer you feel comfortable praying? Punish them, God. Let them fall by their own schemes. In other words, the plans they made for me to sin, may they reap what they sow. Drive them out because of their many crimes. That word is describing the fact that this is the real character of their soul. They're not just occasional sinners. These people are devoted against the things of God, for they rebel against you. That is the root of what's wrong with these people, is they are, their evil words, their evil deeds are because ultimately they stand against God. So my question is, would you be comfortable praying a prayer like that? What does it mean to pray a prayer like that? Now the third point is God's blessing of righteousness. What happens in verse 11, it's a positive contrast, but it's not just merely the opposite of verse 10. Notice this. But let all who take refuge in you rejoice. Now, in verse 7, it was singular, but now there's a community involved. And let them shout for joy forever. So what he's asking, the blessing, is not just that he would flourish. That's not the request that he's making, because verse 10, he's talking about the wicked being punished. And so he's not asking that he would flourish, he would benefit. He's talking about the outcome of flourishing. And what is that? It's joy. He's asking that he would experience noisy rejoicing. Again, notice, let all who take refuge in you rejoice. But he doesn't just stop there. Notice he adds to it. He broadens the act of deliverance. Let them shout for joy forever. So he's talking about people who are thriving in such a way that there is this great rejoicing that takes place. And it's from those who are led by the Lord. May you shelter them, and may those who love your name boast about you. Now, we finally discover who the righteous are. The righteous are those who love the name of God. The name of God stands for the character of God. And it's the people who boast in it. That is, they want to honor God. These people trust God. Verse 12, for you, Lord, bless the righteous ones. You surround him with favor like a shield. Now, 3 words are used to describe God's protection. There is the word shelter in verse 11, and there is the word refuge in verse 11, and also the word shield in verse 12. A refuge is not a temporary shelter. It's a place that you enter into and you commit your life to, And so it's talking about relying on the protective power of God. A shelter, that word you see in your leader's guide, is something that overshadows you, that fences you in, that protects you. And then, of course, the word shield there is a word that talks about the big shield that the soldier would get behind and would protect his entire body. And so he's asking for God to shield him. And he does this, surround him with favor like a shield. The word favor means acceptance or welcome or delight. He's wanting that to protect him. One scholar said that the word favor is built upon the word for will, and he shields these people with his will, meaning that he protects us from those things that attack the will of God in our lives. And so he shields us in those ways. Now, to close the lesson, I'm going to give them a picture of a set of scales, and I'm going to ask them to help me name the things on one side of the scales that the psalmist is praying for God's protection for. It would be things like wickedness, confusion, the schemes of the evil, pain, their words, their lies, worry. All of those things would weigh heavy on this side of the scale. But the psalm concludes with not this side being weighed down. The psalm concludes with this side being weighed down. And so what is it that's over here that outweighs all of these things that happen in our life that trouble us so deeply? And you go back to the lesson summary statement. It's hope. And why do we have hope? Because the God in which we've trusted is a God who's right and just. And we may not see it at this moment, but this is not the final day. The storm will pass. And when the storm passes, we're going to see that our God is just and right. What a hopeful psalm. I trust that you'll enjoy it and your class members will be benefited from it. There will be people who come to your class Sunday, and they will very much need this message. And God bless you for teaching that lesson.